Happy Monday. Today is June 9th, 2025, and buckle up because this is probably the most excited that I've been for a stream. Not that I don't get excited for all of them, but this one is going to be extra special with our surprise guest. We are fortunate enough to have a trial attorney with over 15 years in experience that specializes in criminal defense and civil rights. She's a true vet in federal and state criminal defense, an expert litigator for high-profile cases like murder, robbery, and white-collar crimes. Please welcome to the Hive, Allie.
Yay!
Hey, guys.
How are you doing tonight?
I'm good. Hope you are.
Yeah, we're doing good. We're doing good. And I really appreciate you making some time to hop on the stream. And Devil's Advocates, thank you for the connection here.
Yeah.
So, Allie, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and how it is that you got into being an attorney? And
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in New York, and I went to law school actually in South Carolina. I've practiced in South Carolina for the entirety of my career. And like you said in your introduction, I have focused my practice primarily on criminal defense, everything from, smaller crimes all the way up to complex federal RICO litigation and violent crimes such as murders and sexual assaults. I also do a good bit of 1983 litigation, civil rights involving police brutality, prison conditions. And I'm just, I'm a Luigi Mangione trial fanatic, I guess, is the way to put it. And I'm relatively new to TikTok. That's how Lee and I got linked up. And I'm just excited to talk about the law. I love the law. And I happen to be really enamored with Luigi's case.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can I have a couple of questions to lead into whatever it is that we end up diving into. We kind of go no script here, as I was telling you in the emails. So if there's a direction that you want to take, something that myself or Devil's Advocate says, feel free to. But one of my questions is I always like to learn a little bit more about some of the guests that we have on. Have you, when you said you love law, did you know as a little girl that you wanted to be a lawyer, or when did you decide?
Yeah, so I always make this joke. If you are the child of immigrants, which I am, my mom's a Cuban refugee, my dad is Italian, you get told as a kid, you have two choices. You can be a doctor or a lawyer. And so I actually spent the first 2 years of my undergrad career at pre-med and discovered really quickly that I was real shitty at organic chemistry. And so that wasn't going to shake out for me. And so the running joke is that law school was the fallback. But in reality, I was always kind of enamored with the law. I really enjoyed it. And so it just seemed like a good career path, and it's worked out. And, what do they say? If you enjoy what you do, you never work a day in your life. I love what I do. So it's great.
That's awesome. And Devil's Advocates, you can add into anything if you want to maybe talk about how you and Allie met. And
it's kind of hilarious that she said that, because when I went to college, went to the university, I was going to go into psychology and I was going to become a psychiatrist. And I ended up getting too many C's because of damn biology and chemistry, which I couldn't stand. I just absolutely had no mind for the sciences. And so I got sat down by a counselor when I was working on my bachelor's degree and said, look, dude, you'll never go to grad school. You've got C averages and you need to have up there in the B+ average, kind of to even have a chance. So you're going to be a social worker and you're going to hate your life for the rest of your life. You really need to change your career. I dropped out of school. I never finished my bachelor's. Now I'm thinking maybe I should have gone into law because I was sucked at I sucked at the sciences too. But I thought that went hand in hand. So
that's hilarious, dude. I always like to ask, what did you want to do as a kid? In elementary school, when they career day, they have you write down each grade as you go through, what do you want to be when you're older? I wrote, for some reason, kindergarten through third grade, that I wanted to be an elevator cop. I don't even know what that is. Just somebody that sits in a chair and rides the elevator up and down all day and provides security. So
I'll share two quick things because I don't want to waste Allie's time. I'll share two quick things. I wanted to be one of two things when I was younger. I wanted to be a writer, which I still want to be that. And the other big dream I had is I wanted to be a rock star. I had my 15 minutes of fame when in high school. There was a band that was very popular. They lost their lead singer. I tried out for the band. The guitar player was in the other room while I was trying out with the rest of the band. I did so well on the singing, he comes running out of the thing. I had instant groupies the next day. I had girls following me around high school. And then I was too chicken shit. to get on stage. I was terrified. I had massive stage fright, and I couldn't even get to band practice after that because I was just terrified. But I had groupies for a day, so I was super excited.
That counts, Lee. That counts.
Okay, sweet.
Yeah,
sweet.
And I don't know if I froze a little bit there, but
A little,
anyways, can you guys unclear again?
Mm-hmm.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
We can hear
All
you.
right. So let's get into this a little bit. Okay, let's get into this a little bit. Allie, so when you decide to take on a client, let's use a high profile type situation here, whether it be a Bryan Kohberger or Luigi, is there some sort of like interview process that you do in those type of cases, given that it's more high profile, that makes you look at it maybe a little bit differently than just a normal defense case?
So not really. I treat every case as though it's going to be a trial. I don't think all lawyers necessarily do that out the gate. I do, because even if a case ends up pleading or being negotiated outside of court, I want my client to know that I am prepared from day one, and I'm thinking about things in terms of the long game, meaning I'm thinking about how will this play in front of a jury eventually, even if we never get there. And so cases that have received a lot of media attention on the front end, I have had several of those. They, of course, have to be treated more sensitively, and it involves a lot more talking with the family about the way the case will be handled, as well as talking to the client about how many eyes are on the case and how they have to be so careful, especially if they're out on bond. Like Luigi's detained. Is Bryan Kohberger, is he detained, or is he out on?
Yes. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, you know, when you're in jail, you can't really get into that much trouble other than talking on the phones too much. And so if somebody's out on bond, you know, I give them the talk about how things are being watched and how potential jurors will see the case and media attention and things like that. But in terms of preparing the case, every case for me, from the minute they walk in the door, I pretty much start writing my closing argument in my head.
Wow.
So,
wow.
Allie, what percentage of your clients actually go to trial, and what percentage plead out before you ever get to trial?
That's so tricky. I would say that I feel like I love being in trial, but you know, statistically fewer and fewer cases every year, especially in state court, are going to trial versus 10, 20, 30 years ago. I would say for me, in a good year, I have 5 to 6 trials. So maybe one every other month. Some years I only get 2. Some years I have 8. Some I have more than that. And some of those trials are much more serious and some are a little less serious. And so you can handle more of them. So I would say fewer than half of my cases will end up going to trial, typically, on average.
Okay, that's interesting. That's good to know. I was asking about the high profile type stuff, because does that also change when you're asking the person you're about to be defending questions? Does that change in your mind the legal defense strategy you might go with based on trial by media or any kind of eyes on it, as you said, with more eyes on it?
I think so. I think it requires that both the lawyer and the client be more deliberate about every single small step than we otherwise would be in a case where we did not have eyes on it until it comes time for trial. You know, most cases never see the light of a television camera or a newspaper reporter unless there's something of particular interest. And even then, you really don't see reporters or media following a case from the beginning to the end. It'll get a little bit of coverage at the beginning, maybe a little bit of coverage if something earth-shattering happens, and then maybe they'll show up at the trial if people haven't forgotten about it and don't care anymore. But for somebody like Bryan Kohberger, of course, I feel like the whole country has been obsessed from the beginning, probably because of the nature and the circumstances of that crime. You know, Luigi, I think my theory is a little bit different. I think it's because he's cute. Everybody likes him. And also there's the healthcare, you know, capitalism, you know, ideological component to it as well. And so it does change the way that I approach something, because I'm going to be much more deliberate about every single decision I make, even the small things.
So when you chose to become a defense attorney, and you obviously only answer stuff that you feel comfortable answering, but in your head, did you create some sort of moral compass or moral checkboxes as far as, okay, this person, whether you ask them if they're guilty or not, which, by the way, do lawyers do that?
Yeah, we do. Sometimes I don't want to know.
Yeah. Well, that's what I was going to say. So that's where that moral compass kind of comes in. I'm like, depending on what the crime is, do you have a self-talk process of, can I defend this person, not just based on I could win the case, or maybe I don't?
So I don't, because I don't think I need it. And I'll tell you why. I think I used this phrase with Lee a couple times. I don't defend a person's behavior. I defend that person's constitutional rights. I defend that person against the potential of government overreach and prosecutorial misconduct. I hold the state or the federal government to its burden to prove a person guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. They must do that in accordance with the law. They must follow the rules of court. And if they don't, then the ball is always in the favor of the defendant, or it should be in the criminal process. This presumption of innocence, everybody says it, we say it, but we don't mean it, or we don't know what we mean when we say it. It literally means that the state or the federal government are wrong about the defendant from the beginning. That's the starting point. And you can't move from that point until and unless the evidence put forth by whoever's prosecuting the case has changed the minds of the jurors such that they are firmly convinced beyond a reasonable doubt of that person's guilt. And so, whether somebody has done it or not done it, my job is to ensure that the state does its job, or the feds do their job. And however that works out, it works out. But my job is to defend their rights and to make sure that the process is constitutional, ethical, and proper. Does that make sense?
That's an amazing answer. And I think that Hive, which is what I call the chat, Allie, we're the hive mind here. And I
want to ask a follow-on question to it. I want to ask a follow-on, which is, you mentioned, and I think there was another person who may be a lawyer that answered similarly, that they feel the same way about the whole, sometimes I don't want to know. But if I were a lawyer, I want to know everything, right? Because I don't want to get any surprises. Now, granted, I wouldn't expect my client to tell me the truth, but in a perfect world, I would be like, I want to know everything that can possibly come up and surprise me in the trial, so I can make sure we don't go down a path that's going to get us in trouble. So, I mean, how do you negotiate the whole I don't want to know, but then you might get surprised by something that you might have known the answer to if you had known?
Yeah. Okay. So let me be clear. I was being slightly facetious there. I want my client to tell me everything, but you just hit on something. Clients, it is human nature in a lot of ways it's self-preservation, right? Or to minimize your role in something. So oftentimes, and I don't want to say like clients lie, they do, but that's human nature. We all do it. And none of us know what we would do if we found ourselves accused of a crime, whether we did it or didn't do it. Our nature is to preserve and to protect ourselves. And so I think a lot of times when clients aren't honest with their attorneys or can't be honest with their attorneys, it's out of a place of self-preservation and maybe not necessarily realizing how much damage can be done further on down the road. But yes, I want to know everything. Controversial tactic, but I polygraph my clients. I do it under the attorney-client privilege. I have my polygraph examiner come in. Those results are not admissible in court, but I use them as an investigative tool. I use them as a come to Jesus moment with my clients sometimes if there's something I need them to fess up about. And I also use them to negotiate cases. And so really, Lee, to your question, what I cannot do as a lawyer, as an officer of the court, is place somebody on a witness stand knowing that he will lie. And so if I have not had the conversation with the client about whether they did it, that means I haven't properly prepared him for cross-examination. And I would always want the answer to that question in that scenario. But oftentimes, for various reasons, we may not want to put the client on the stand. Sometimes that's a game time decision, and sometimes that's something we know from the beginning. If I've got a client that comes in and his record is longer than my left arm, he ain't getting on that witness stand. I don't care what anybody says. Okay. So I don't necessarily care whether he did it or didn't do it, because I know he is not getting up there.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of things that you've said about the following the legal procedure the right way. Mm-hmm. And then with what Devil's Advocates just asked, as far as clients being afraid to implicate themselves to their own defense attorney, mm-hmm. What would you say is the best thing that you can do? I've played the Shut the Fuck Up Fridays by those two pot lawyers quite a time.
Yeah.
Would you say that's the best advice? Advice?
Yes, always. Shut the fuck up is always in so many contexts. Yeah.
Best legal advice ever.
Yes, best legal advice ever.
Yeah. And so, okay. One of the things, so obviously Devil's Advocates, more about the Luigi case. Please, obviously, feel free to ask questions on that. I do want to quick touch on the Bryan Kohberger aspect. It's not that you need to be uber familiar with the case. I know you're obviously a very busy woman, and you said that you have been more so focusing on the Luigi case. But with Bryan Kohberger,
slowly getting me obsessed with Bryan Kohberger. So
yes,
I'm giving her a crash course.
I love it. I love it. So I will try to explain a little bit of the background. Are you really familiar with how they got Bryan Kohberger's DNA in this case?
We actually talked about that a little bit today. So I know.
Okay. So the way that somebody who's obviously never gone to law school, but am passionate about not using an emotional tragedy that people could maybe palate American rights overreach in a court system while their emotions are heightened.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that's always bothered me, where the media and the narrative that gets everybody scared or freaked out. And then they're like, well, we could catch him if we used this tactic. And then everyone's like, fine, as long as you only do it with that monster. But They always end up codifying it and making it law after the fact. So the way that I view it is, they didn't have probable cause for Bryan Kohberger, so that they couldn't go get a warrant for the DNA. Therefore, the feds ended up breaking their own guidelines and using a legal loophole to obtain his DNA from his parents' trash, allegedly, but connect it to a third-party database. And what are your thoughts on that?
I think it's horseshit.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
In a nutshell, that's my analysis. I think it's horseshit. And also, first of all, just like going back to, you made a really good point. Okay. Due process is not selective based on who we think deserves it, based on quality X, Y, or Z. They're not likable. They did this, they committed this heinous crime, and therefore we feel comfortable cutting a corner because we just have to get that guy. Like, the ends justify the means. The ends never justify the means when it comes to skirting due process or eroding people's rights, because it is such, I hate to use the cliche legal term, slippery slope, but once you do it, you never stop. And once you allow a prosecutor, and their feet are not held to the fire, once they are allowed to do that, and once judges continue to allow them to do shady shit like that, it never stops. And the next person is not going to get the benefit of full due process. So I think that's dangerous. So I couldn't let that go, because you made such a good point there. But in terms of how DNA is collected, Lee and I were talking about this earlier. And I understand the judge has made a ruling, and I hope that that's been properly preserved for appeal. But they cannot go around probable cause and then not disclose how they got the sample to match, to do the comparison, to the defense. Because my understanding is they have not disclosed that information to the defense. In fact, they don't want to, and they've refused to. And I would love to get my hands on a transcript if I can. I don't know how the judge allowed that to stand, because you cannot go around the normal method for obtaining a search warrant, to do investigation, to get to DNA by circumventing the normal processes. And that's what it sounds like. And again, without knowing a whole lot about what happened, it sounds like that's what they did. So I'm very curious to see how that issue would come up on appeal.
Let me clarify that a little bit. I did actually send, I don't know if we want to pull it up or not, but I did actually send Bertie a couple of screenshots from Howard Bloom's book, When the Night Comes Falling. And he has a paragraph or two about what they did. And let me summarize it again. If you want to put it up, Bertie, great. If you don't, well, I'll just speak to it. But what the tricky part they did is, so Moscow PD couldn't come up with a lead in the case for almost a month. And the feds were involved from day one. And the feds started looking into Bryan Kohberger, and they weren't telling the Moscow PD that they knew about Bryan Kohberger, they suspected Bryan Kohberger. Go back to the page before that, the one that's all blue mostly. There you go. So this right here in this paragraph where it says why, one theory had it that the Bureau was simply being cautious. IgG determination was not a sort of evidence. Let me just summarize this first. If you want to read along, you can. But the basic idea is that the feds basically said Othram Labs put something into CODIS, couldn't find a hit because, well, Bryan Kohberger doesn't have any criminal background, so he's not in CODIS, right? So FBI asked us to take over Othram Labs' sample and they doubled the size. They did some kind of manipulation where they basically take the sample and they keep replicating it until they get a big enough sample size. They eventually used that to get to 4 family members whose all last names didn't match Kohberger. And somehow through genetic trees, they ended up getting to, maybe it's the family in Pennsylvania somewhere that might be related. And then they went for a trash pull on the family and got his dad's DNA from the trash and said, well, the biological material of his dad is, 99 point some ridiculous ass number likely to be the father of the suspect in the Idaho 4 murders. And so therefore that puts Bryan Kohberger at the scene. That's kind of how they went there. But as far as the probable cause affidavit, here's where it gets tricky. So the feds gave the name Bryan Kohberger to Moscow PD, knowing that and this is my analysis, knowing that they couldn't use the IgG information. It was sketchy in the first place. And basically said, now that you know the name, start digging into this guy. And then Moscow PD said, oh, you know what? There's a guy in Pullman who drives a white Elantra, and he happened to be out driving that night. So we're looking into this guy. And they kind of made it that way. And so then they used all that data, his driving records, his cell phone pings, and basically ignored the IgG information in the probable cause affidavit. So it technically didn't really end up, I don't think, in strong language in the IgG. But the tricky part is, I'll get off the mic so you can comment on all this, is that the prosecution wants to use the DNA evidence in trial to say, we've got Bryan Kohberger at the scene because of, and it's a nanogram sized piece. It's an invisible sized piece of DNA on the button snap of the knife. But anyways, they want to use it in trial to say they got there, and they have not disclosed in discovery to the defense how they developed that sample. And so this is a big issue. And the judge had said he's supporting that the prosecution doesn't have to tell the defense how they got that sample, and yet they want to present it to the jury. And I think that's the problem.
Yeah, that's wild. And this is trace DNA, right? This is even like real DNA. Sorry, right. I freaking hate trace DNA. It's such nonsense.
Yeah, and it was found. Go ahead, Devils.
Sorry. Well, again, this is the argument, right? So they called it touch DNA, and I think you and I talked about this. That in the industry, they call touch and trace DNA kind of synonymously. They use the term touch, which implies to any juror that you literally touched it, when it could have been a piece of skin cell floated through the air and landed on it, right?
That's why they call it that. It is inherently prejudicial, because they know that a jury is going to hear the phrase touch DNA and not unreasonably assume that means that somebody touched something. Lee, did you share the example that I gave with Birdie?
No, I would love for you to share that.
We have time for you to give the example? Okay, no. Birdie, I'm not sure if you're familiar with this case. So there was a case, I don't even freaking know, maybe the mid 2000s or maybe early 2010s. There was a guy, there was an unhoused gentleman that lived in California. I gotcha.
There
was an unhoused gentleman that lived in California. My understanding is he had a pretty significant alcohol problem. He was outside of a liquor store, and I think he was so drunk that he passed out. Somebody called an ambulance. EMS comes out, they treat him, and they end up taking him to the hospital, and they keep him like a day or 2 days. That same night that EMS came to get the drunk unhoused man to treat him, there was a rich IT executive that lived 50 miles away, somewhere else in California, that was murdered in his home during a home invasion. And EMS responded to that scene and pronounced him dead. And lo and behold, make a long story short, the unhoused gentleman ends up getting charged with the murder of the wealthy businessman. He gets charged with the murder of the wealthy businessman because they decide that the wealthy businessman's DNA is under his fingernail on one of his on the businessman's finger on one of his fingers, that the unhoused guy's DNA is there. How did that happen? I'm going to fast forward. He didn't do it, but the same EMS worker that treated the drunk guy outside of the liquor store used a pulse oximeter. Okay. You know, when they put the little thing on your finger, use the pulse ox. 2 hours later, responded to the scene of the businessman's murder, put a pulse ox on his finger, and ding, 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 guess what? Transferred trace DNA, not freaking touch DNA, transferred it from the drunk guy to the dead businessman.
And convicted him.
Murder.
Yeah.
Because his DNA was found there. So that is how easily trace DNA can be moved and manipulated and float through the air and get transferred on somebody else's body, on an object, to another person. And it's scary.
And this is what bothers me the most, Allie, is people are so, vehement with me that devil's advocates, you're an idiot. His DNA is literally at the scene. You can't get over that. Even Hitler, Judge Hitler, had a famous statement: DNA is DNA every day of the week and twice on Sunday. So they have this idea that if the DNA is on the knife sheath, he was there in the house. And that's not true necessarily. I mean, it could be true, but it doesn't prove that.
Yeah. It's the case. I think the gentleman's name is Lucas with a weird, funky spelling. I don't know. It's Lucas Anderson's out of California, I would say mid 2000s. It's an old-ish case now, but not really. But it's fascinating.
And I think it was overturned. I think his case was overturned.
Yes. He was exonerated, but holy crap.
Yeah. Is this it, Allie? Is his name Lucas Anderson?
Yeah, right there.
Yep.
Yeah,
okay.
Lukis. Dang, you're quick. Yes,
Yeah.
that's it.
So, okay, let me ask you this now, Allie. Because where my non-defense attorney credentials, but my fake defense attorney brain goes is, could I tell the jury that story or reference that case to a judge, and does it have any credibility?
Oh, you could 100%. So at a motion to exclude the evidence or a motion in limine, you could absolutely use that as an example. I would every single day. I'd be like, Judge, here's a perfect example of how and why trace DNA. And if that's all you have, meaning if they didn't find saliva or semen or blood or fingerprints or any other form of identifying DNA evidence at the scene, and they're relying solely on this one speck of trace DNA, 100% I'm arguing that case to the judge. But once the judge makes a ruling and allows that in, you would introduce testimony about the unreliability of it through your own expert witness, which that's why, it's not over for Bryan Kohberger and, with the judge making this ruling that this is allowed. The defense just has to, and they added somebody to their defense team, I think, that is pretty well versed in DNA, or at least I think I read that somewhere.
Yes.
And they may also hire an expert, and they can try to, without putting the jury to sleep, because God, nothing puts a jury to sleep like DNA. But they can try to explain that in a way where they would appreciate and understand.
And it's complicated because if I've watched a lot of cases, and if I've ever seen a judge that seems to be biased, it's Judge Hitler. And he doesn't want their expert to testify. He's come up with all kinds of reasons why it's irrelevant for their, for the defense's lawyer to, again, his mentality is DNA is DNA. There's no reason for us to have another expert come on and talk just about DNA. It's DNA. And to be fair, and I don't know if it's because they just had to at some point, the defense is kind of acquiesced to okay, Kohberger's DNA is at the scene, but it doesn't explain how it's there. And by the way, we think it was planted. Now that's a big one, because if you're gonna just logically, I have to play devil's advocates. That's my name of my channel, right? Is if you're gonna plant DNA, shouldn't you plant DNA bigger than a piece of a grain of sand that you can't even see? I mean, plant a good fingerprint, for Pete's sake. So I have a hard time a little bit with
Mark Furman did it.
My God. You gotta put the glove.
Sorry, the younger crowd is not going to get that reference.
It's amazing.
Hey, I'm just going to be honest. I think it was his son, by the way, who did it.
OJ's son. Yeah.
Anyways, that's so interesting. So I guess when you were explaining that, Allie, where my head went to was, wow, here I am going through, somebody must have planted that. But in the unhomed person, as you said, and the EMT with the pulse the pulse oximeter, that is such a simple thing. Somebody in the Hive said, what if one of the cops that pulled him over for a traffic stop touched his license? And then, again, who knows how long before that and how long it could last. I know it depends on the surface. A lot of people say that brass touch DNA doesn't live for very long, or leather, or whatever it might be. But that is an interesting story about that out in California. Did that guy get out of jail? Was he exonerated, or?
Yes.
He was. Okay.
Yeah.
See, and there's another thing. I mean, this is not a super popular thing. But I've always said from the very beginning of on TikTok, at least, what if Kohberger didn't go into the house and he was the getaway driver? What if he dropped somebody off at the house and they committed the murder? That would also explain how trace DNA could get on the knife sheath and it wasn't his. He may have never touched it, but if he was even in proximity at any time of that knife, that's one way it could have got onto the knife, kind of thing. Now, granted, if he was taking somebody to a murder scene and he knew it was murder, he's an accomplice to murder, and so there's that. But again, what if he was taking somebody to a drug buy and it went south and he just took off and left the scene and he's kept his mouth shut until now, because now all of a sudden they want to put him to death, and he's like, wait wait a minute. And maybe that's where the alternate suspect came out, is like, yeah, I wasn't me, I was somebody else. But anyways, there's a lot of theories that could explain how the DNA got on it. All of them seem hard to understand, of course, unless he'd been in the house before, and he claims he's never been to the house before. If he'd been there before, it'd be a moot point because his DNA would be all over the place in the air, possibly, and whatever. But supposedly he's never been in the house. And the other part, Allie, that's really interesting, by the way, from a DNA thing, because that's kind of what I wanted to focus on when I have you on, is talking about your thoughts about DNA, is there was other individuals at the scene. There was a blood spot on a banister on the lower thing that they were just identified as unknown male, B, and there was blood inside of a glove outside the house that they picked up that was unknown male D, and they basically had said there was no need to go very far in testing it because we already know who did it. We've got Bryan Kohberger's. Like, are you kidding me? Like, how do you just say, oh, we already know who it is, so we don't need to look at other blood at the scene?
Yeah. Unfortunately, I mean, law enforcement does that all the time. It's that tunnel vision mentality. Once they hone in on somebody who works and they can stop working the case, because let's be honest, they don't want to keep working very hard to look to find the truth. If there's an easy, and I hate to say it that way, but so often it's true. They've got an easy solution, an easy person who fits. They will then, instead of doing it in the reverse, they will make the evidence fit their suspect instead of continuing to ask questions and allowing the evidence to dictate where their investigation goes. Instead, they just keep shoving square pegs in round holes because they need for that prosecution to stand. They need for that investigation to have integrity, even though it has anything but.
Yeah.
And that's where I feel like we are with the Kohberger situation. At some point, they made a determination that Kohberger was going to be their guy, and now they're just hammering every square peg into that round hole because they have to, because they've identified who the guy is, and they're just going all in on it.
And now they stand to be embarrassed if anything comes out that they've actually royally effed up and he's not the person, or they've done a bad job. The whole country's watching this case.
Right. That would be the biggest defamation lawsuit I think we will see in decades, because I've always said too that the narrative feels too clean, like just from like a human instinct, like kind of contrarian thinker brain standpoint. It's been too clean. It's felt like it was built around him, kind of what you just referenced, where they have some evidence, they're going to find somebody to make it fit towards. And I am also just so curious, like, if Bryan Kohberger really is this loner incel that moved across the country and then committed a quadruple homicide with a K-bar knife and somehow didn't have any points of entrance, exit, blood everywhere, no blood on him, nothing like that, you would think, though, the way the news has said it and the way that the state is saying it, it'd be the most open and shut quadruple homicide ever, not the most redacted case, which I know we did want to talk about DNA. But while we got you here, what are your thoughts whenever you see a case at this level go like extremely redacted from the public? Does that typically mean a confidential informant? Does that mean WITSEC? Does that mean?
No, it's really judge dependent. So there's a gag order in the case.
Oh yeah.
And they reference national security as well.
That's interesting. But it's judge dependent. Some judges just don't want to deal with the backlash that comes from having to manage the media circus that will go along with a case of that high profile, or they want to try to contain the information. And some of that has a legitimate purpose, right? Like when you are looking forward and saying, I'm going to have to choose a fair and unbiased jury in this case 2 or 3 years down the road, and you have circumstances that make it such that everybody's heard of the case, everybody's got an opinion about the case, everybody's been reading things and listening to things, it makes it harder. The judge will still ask those potential jurors, can you still be fair and impartial? People lie. And so a lot of times the judges just want to kind of contain that to try to preserve the defendant's right to a fair trial. But the other side of that is that the public has a right to know, right? We're supposed to have open courtrooms and transparency so that we can know what's happening behind those closed doors, so we can know what the state is or isn't doing, what they've turned over versus what they haven't, so that we can examine things and look at them. So to answer your question, I think it's judge dependent, but also, I am sympathetic towards the judge having to balance the interests of those two things.
I've got a question for you. I want to get your opinion on, Allie, and that is from a jury's perspective. if we get into the DNA discussion in trial, which I'm certain we're going to, that could be, I'm guessing, days of the prosecution trying to educate the jury on how DNA works and how the sample was built and blah, 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 so they could reassure the jury that that's a good sample. And then you're going to have days of the defense countering everything you just heard. How much does the jury just check out at some point because they just can't follow the science? Or how much do they just go, well, the prosecution says it's good, so it's got to be good because they told me so. I really don't understand it. It's above my head, but they're saying it's rock solid and it's 99.99999% ridiculous number, so it must be true. Like, how does that affect the jury when they have to listen to huge amounts of scientific data?
If there are witnesses on the stand testifying about DNA science for longer than one day, here's what you saw it here first, okay? Actual footage of all 12 jurors.
Right?
That's what they all going to look like, okay? You can't. So if they don't want to lose the jury, they will try to find somebody who does not come across like a robot, who can have a real conversation with people and who can make the complicated simple. And then the defense would do well to do the same, because
who does that benefit more? Who does that benefit more, Allie? Does it, if the jury starts checking out and falling asleep in their chair, does it benefit the prosecution more or the defense?
I think it benefits neither, but the problem is I feel like that the public, ever since, we call it the CSI effect, ever since people started becoming obsessed with true crime, listening to podcasts, watching TV, thinking that they know about forensic evidence, we have people that have preconceived notions or ideas about things. And I talk to very educated people, even in the legal field, who say something like, what'd you say? The DNA is DNA. Well, no, it's not. Blood is different than fingerprints, is different from touch. And let me tell you why. And I give people that example. And so you think about how jurors who don't work and live in this space, who don't hear this, on a regular basis, they hear his DNA was at the scene. And then to them, they're like, that's all I need to know. They found his DNA at the scene. That must mean he was there. And so I think in that particular example, the advantage would go to the prosecution, just because I suspect that the general public would hear that and make an assumption and then kind of check out and not listen if the explanation was really boring. And then if the explanation only comes from the defense, they're going to think, well, they're saying that because they're trying to get their client off, versus that they're trying to clarify the science.
I'm curious how many homicide cases that you've been involved in which DNA wasn't an issue, or is it always an issue? And how many times, like in this scene, quadruple homicide, and the DNA evidence for Kohberger is one speck of a nanogram sized DNA. How likely is that to happen in a crime scene?
That is, for as messy as it sounds like that crime scene was, from the little bit that I've read about it, from talking to you, it would be really interesting to hear how someone could get out of that house leaving the equivalent of a speck of dust of touch DNA, if he was even in the house. Okay.
On the most convenient piece of evidence too.
And of course, the argument is he is a PhD criminology student, so he knows how to commit the perfect murder. And to counter that right back, because I have to. So that's the argument. He's a PhD candidate student, so he knows how to do it. Yet he's too dumb to not take his cell phone to the crime scene or drive his own car to the crime scene. That's the part that I just can't handle. It's like, okay, so he's so brilliant, he can leave only a speck of DNA and track none of the victim's DNA out to his car, anywhere where they can find. But he's not smart enough to leave his cell phone behind to commit a quadruple murder. I don't get that.
Yeah, no, it would be highly unlikely. But I mean, that being said, there are cases that are purely circumstantial that have no, direct evidence at all. And so that, doesn't foreclose the possibility of a prosecution, of course. But, I think if I'm the defense lawyer in that case, I am making so much noise about that. I am explaining it. I am describing the scene in great detail. I'm letting the jury see those pictures. I'd probably have to think about that, whether I'd fight that or not, to kind of just give the example of how absurd it is that something like this could have happened. He had nothing on him and he left nothing behind. What are the odds of that happening? Does that sound reasonable to you? Does that sound logical? Does that sound likely? And if not, does that little thing in your mind that's questioning, you know what that is? We call that reasonable doubt.
Oh, I feel like you may have used that line in the past in a closing argument.
Yeah.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that a lot of people want Bryan Kohberger to be guilty, just like I think a lot of people want Karen Reed to be innocent. And that's just more of like the general consensus. And I bring those points up for the want, because that's how effective a narrative created by media can be in influencing jurors. There's been rumors that YouTube algorithms have been putting, pro conviction type videos in people that into the people's feeds that live in that area. Obviously, there was the drama around the Dateline NBC episode and the leaks. I feel like if you have a jury that, all right, I'm going to ask it actually. How often do you go into a trial feeling like the trial's over because of the jury picks prior to anything happening? All the time. That's what a lot of people say. Like,
yeah, sometimes you take one look at the jury and you're like,
yeah, yeah,
damn,
yeah.
Why did these people show up for jury duty today?
Yeah. I mean,
and that's horrible, because we really are. I mean, jury qualification and voir dire is like the biggest exercise in judging books by cover and profiling that like the human that can happen in the human experience. It's truly awful, especially in states like mine where we don't have meaningful attorney conducted voir dire. Only the judge can ask questions. We're not allowed to. And so we really just have to kind of look at people, size them up, and make like a split-second decision about how we think they would be to our clients. So yeah, no, that happens a lot, unfortunately.
Yeah. And trust me, I wasn't trying to say that like people want Karen Reed to be innocent if she is innocent, or Kohberger. And that's not me even like being a wuss right here. I just was trying to talk about the power of the news and the power of what people put out and how it can influence a jury.
Well, and I think in Kohberger's case, frankly, I mean, I don't know how much, maybe Allie can comment on this too, but in Kohberger's case, let's say that the jury doesn't have enough to feel like they can convict this guy, if that was somehow possible. Let's say they didn't. How are they going to feel that nobody is going to be held accountable for 4 people being killed? Those girls are, and the young man are dead, and somebody needs to be held accountable, right? So at the end of the day, is there a tendency to want to just have somebody go down for this?
Yep. Somebody has to pay. Somebody has to answer for this. And weirdly, this always has driven me nuts. Don't be mad at my client who was falsely accused of this crime. Be mad at the cops and the prosecution who didn't get it right enough to arrest the right person. So don't take it out on my client because the cops didn't do their freaking job. You get upset with the prosecution because they had tunnel vision and they pursued the wrong person. But yes, that is very real, especially when there's a heinous crime with very sympathetic victims, beautiful little college girls and a college boy. Yes, everybody feels that, right? Like parents feel that, their peers feel that. And people have this, we have this natural human reaction that we want somebody to pay, that there should be justice for the victims' families, that there should be justice for the perpetrator, that there should be retribution for the crime, that there should be punishment. Yes, and there should be all of those things in a civilized society. Yes, this is how it's supposed to work. But in a civilized society, we make sure that we get the right person and we give them due process so that we don't have false outcomes. That's the most important thing. And their rage should be directed towards people in the chain of the process who cut corners to get to the end result instead of getting to the right result. That's where they should focus their frustration or their desire for justice.
Yeah, that's well said. That's very well said, because I think what like I have on screen here, it's Trey said there's huge pressure to arrest somebody, like anybody.
Yep. Close the case, closed by arrest. That's law enforcement speak, closed by arrest. Like, in meaning, hot potato, it's no longer my problem.
Yeah, exactly. And also, not to just sound like a broken record with the media, but then the police can go to the media and be like, you guys are safe. See, we got the guy. You don't have anything to be worried about. And
that's part of the problem with the alternative suspect angle, is it almost feels like Hitler and everyone in America is going to be fine. If there's an alternative suspect, give us somebody who's good enough that we can put them behind bars, because somebody's going behind bars for this. So if you're going to do an alternative suspect, we better have a name and we better have enough to get him. But it was funny because somebody pointed out, do they have to have as much on the alternative suspect as they had for Kohberger? Because frankly, they didn't have a whole lot on Kohberger when they started that process of arresting him. So how good do they have to have of evidence of this alternative suspect to be reasonable doubt for people? And because it feels like people want to be like, the only way we're letting Kohberger off is not only that you got a possible other person, but enough that we can go get that person and put them away for it.
And good luck, by the way, once there's a failed prosecution for whatever reason, whether it's because the defense has done such a good job that they've actually proven, even though it's not their burden, that that wasn't the right person. Good luck getting the prosecution to go back and reopen that case and reinvestigate it. Cops just, they don't want to do it, especially if it's not something that they care about, if they don't have pressure. Are either of you familiar with the Gilgo Beach murders?
Yeah.
In New York? You know, there was the one mom who blew the lid off of the whole thing because she just wouldn't let it go, but they did not want to see what was right in front of them. And look how many people were in danger because they were just like, oh, you know, But, you know, same concept. If the prosecution of one person results in an acquittal, it's pretty low probability that that case is going to get back on an investigator's desk for reinvestigation.
I don't know if you know the statistic off the top of your head, but I did a deep dive on where somebody's DNA, like for example, the one that you referenced with the EMT person and the finger pulse check thing. I think that in the last 3 decades, there's been like 526 people that were convicted, about to do life, where technically their DNA put them at the scene.
Yep.
And then they were actually freed by that same DNA that's theirs when it's retested later based on percentages or story or new evidence. I just, you know, somebody had asked, what does the title of this live mean where I say DNA in court exposed? I have a couple of questions written down. And the first one that I have, I should have asked after you said you make all of your clients do a lie detector test protected under attorney-client privilege because it's not admissible in court. But at what point do you think DNA is going to be looked at the same way in court like a lie detector is because of advancement? You don't think it'll ever be looked at? You think it'll all be relevant?
No, I think the science is strong behind DNA. What I do wish is that we would do better with the narrative that DNA is DNA is DNA, because it's not. We have to separate, you know, this being a perfect example, we have to separate between trace DNA versus body fluids or even fingerprint evidence is kind of meh. But I don't think that we will see a time where DNA is viewed in the same way as like bite mark analysis or polygraph examinations, things like that. I think that those things have been found not to meet the standards of reliability that are required for that type of testimony, whereas the case law has shown that DNA is very much reliable, and it's not perfect, but you're right. It's been hundreds of people since we started with DNA that have been exonerated as a result. It's pretty scary stuff.
It is scary. I bring that up, and I brought my tinfoil hat over, Allie.
All right.
Sometimes if I don't put this on, people take it a little bit too serious. This, I don't know if you can read it, but this is from 2009. It was published in the New York Times. So this was, 16 years ago. I've brought this up a couple of times on the stream, but I wanted to get your thoughts on this as well. And it talks about how with just 425 snippets of any person's DNA, they can engineer any conceivable profile, even without having that person's original DNA. And you have the leader of this scientific journal, Dan Frumkin, says you can just engineer a crime scene and any biology undergrad could perform this. Now, I get what you're saying where DNA is going to be relevant. Differentiating the DNA is very important from a jury standpoint. But I know not everybody has access to these tools to do it, but in a high profile case, high pressure case for the state, like a Luigi case, like a Bryan Kohberger case, they would have access to the tools to be able to do this, especially with these giant third-party databases. I feel like the federal government can go to them and be like, we need 423 people's DNA. We need to build this dude's profile out and plant it. Now, again, that's why I have the tinfoil hat on, because I doubt our government would ever do anything and overreach someone's rights just to close a case. But I want you to listen. I'm going to play this clip for you. This is Ann Taylor talking about the DNA sample size doubling. And in the article, it talks about when the DNA doubles in size, it's usually a dead giveaway that it's been manipulated because it's been put through a process.
Right, they're replicating the cells, yeah.
Exactly. So I'm going to play this. And she also has no chain of custody from when the DNA left the lab got to the FBI, and she got surprised in court. So here is this clip.
FBI gets involved. The profile, the text file, that's a snip to use to try to identify somebody is more than twice as big when it gets to the FBI from Othram. We don't know how. We don't have any notes. We don't know who did any of the work. We don't have any lab protocols. We don't have any quality assurances.
So, I mean, that right there, I feel like after Ann Taylor said that, a lot of people jumped down her throat for that, like knowing she was going to maybe go down a route of saying, hey, this could have been planted. It could have been messed with. It could have been manipulated. Have you seen a case or know of a case where DNA was planted?
Not one of my cases, to my knowledge.
Okay.
I think probably the most famous one is going to be DNA planting. I mean, just evidence containing DNA would be O.J. Simpson is the first, of course, the first one that comes to mind. But no, I've not. Thank God, I've never had that happen in my case, to my knowledge. You know, I don't think anybody. It would have to be a case that somebody cared that much about. I mean, again, here's me putting on my conspiracy theorist hat now. It would have to be a case they cared a whole lot about, to spend a whole lot of money and get a whole lot of people in on the conspiracy, and just then you've got to keep all those people quiet. That's messy.
Yeah, I know. And sometimes I like to think that it probably happens more than it does. Like, because it's a fun thought process. Yeah. I just feel like I don't know. I just feel like the DNA aspect, as you perfectly summed up with the story, and then with there's so many differences in what DNA means, and just the definition of touch DNA when a jury member hears it. It's so important for people to know. And I'd be curious if these people that are saying Bryan Kohberger's DNA is at the scene, if they just learned that definition, how many of them do you think would say, oh, well, wait, hang on, it could just be a skin cell that floated through the air and blew in the wind? Like, that's crazy to me.
And here's the other thing. Like, here's the other thing. One of the suspects in the case, in my opinion, even though he was cleared early in the case, right, is Kaylee Gonzalez's boyfriend, right? But the problem is he was in the house a lot. So by definition, his DNA is all over that crime scene, which is funny because we're trying to act like, well, Bryan Kohberger's DNA is at the crime scene. Let me tell you whose DNA is also at that crime scene. Jack DeCour's. No question about it.
And 100 other people. It was a college house. How many parties, how many keggers do you think they had at the house? I mean, that just, I'd be pointing to that all day long. It's a house. I mean, and it's trace DNA. It's floating around in the air. I mean, we're constantly shedding skin. We're shedding hair. We're coughing. We're sneezing. We're singing. We're talking. And those things are just around and floating. And that's all they got. It's crazy.
It is crazy. It's crazy. And it's a red flag. I just think that the way that you pick a jury in this case, like you said, is probably everything that's going to matter. Just having the death penalty off the table differentiates what type of jurors. People that typically say they're okay with sentencing somebody to death are more likely to convict in general. And so thank you for touching on that. I know you said you're a little bit newer to the Kohberger case. I think you did a wonderful job, and it sounds like you definitely have gotten your feet wet, and hopefully you keep looking at it, because there's a lot of people that are like, you need to hit up Ann Taylor and tell her that. And so I just did a poll in the Hive, and I said, type a 1 if you want Allie to share her thoughts on the Luigi case and sum up her thoughts on it. And there's a ton of 1s that just flooded in. So I don't know if Devil's Advocates, if you want to maybe ask her a question that you guys have talked about in the past, that would be good for the Hive to kind of get a summary of it, or what, but I'll let you two kind of have the floor here.
Well, I guess for the Luigi case, just to keep it on the theme that we have right now, the prosecution recently came out and basically said in an 82-page response to a filing by Luigi's attorney that they have some of these questions that we've been asking for a long time. They've said definitively in their writing, we have ballistics match. The ballistics on the gun that Luigi had, they say, does match the ballistics that were fired at the scene. We have Luigi's fingerprints at the scene. We have his chewing gum in a backpack with his DNA at the scene. So, Allie, what are your thoughts about that DNA evidence that they're saying we've got him dead to rights. We've got his fingerprints, his saliva, and we've got the gun that literally fired the bullets in his possession. How do you explain that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you explain it. If all of that comes in, if it survives a motion to suppress for various reasons, and that comes in at trial, I think that Luigi Mangione's defense team has an uphill battle. That being said, we don't know what Luigi's defense is at this point. And I've said this kind of from the beginning. You have, I call him Team Shaggy. It wasn't him. And then you've got Team Kendrick Lamar. Yeah, I did it. Yeah, I did it. Deserved it, right? Okay. So, but we don't know what Karen A's defense is going to be. And so if her defense is the Shaggy defense, it wasn't him, that's going to be pretty tricky if all that evidence comes in. That's going to be a lot. If her defense is somehow an argument for jury nullification of, yes, he did it, and let me try to explain to you why, then I don't think it's as consequential. So it really just depends on their strategy. It'll be really interesting to see because they have not tipped their hand on it at this point yet. Keeping all of her options open.
So Devil's Advocate is the one that kind of got me into the Luigi case, and he gave me a theory. I don't know if it was because of a TV show that you saw or like a simulated out event where Devil's Advocates. Do you remember that? It was like you said that the healthcare system actually could go on trial because it's the equivalent of like if a son killed the dad who was abusing the mom, and they're technically protecting people so they get a lesser charge if they put the healthcare system on trial by saying, hey, these insurance fraud claims or these insurance claims that aren't going through are actually killing people.
Yeah. Well,
is there a defense for that?
You're touching on two things that I've said. One, there was in my early stages, based on a documentary that came out said they lost the shooter for some time in Central Park, and then they picked up an individual that looked just like him leaving the park. I said, what if it's not the same individual? What if they swapped and somebody, because there was multiple people they were chasing that had the same similar look, backpack on, black outfit, and they had to let some people go because they ended up following false leads. So what if this was a coordinated thing and the shooter actually got away and somebody else took the fall for it? And that was based on this idea of this movie called How to Blow Up a Pipeline, where a group of people that conspired to do something, and one of them agreed to take the fall for the whole thing. The other issue that you're referring to was oh gosh, now I'm going to lose what the other issue was. There was two things that you're playing on. The money, it was the self-defense because it was killing people. So that story is interesting. I'll try to be brief, is because Law and Order, the fiction TV show, did an episode called Folk Hero, in which they depicted essentially the shooting in New York, the same exact thing. And in that, and by the way, Karen Agnifilo, who's Luigi's attorney, is an advisor on Law and Order, which makes it even more interesting, right? And so as an advisor, so the show depicts this thing, and the defense for the shooter was, yeah, he did it, but he was doing it to save lives, because every single day that the predatory healthcare system is using AI to deny claims, thousands of people are dying every single day. And so therefore, and nothing says that when you defend others for their life, that they have to be standing in front of you. So if this individual killed somebody to save thousands of people, nothing says they had to be standing in front of him when he saved their lives. So is there a defense of others argument to be made? Now, I think Ali says that's going to be a long stretch to do that. But that was, for me, like, wow, could this trial end up being a landmark case in the United States of a self-defense or defense of others kind of position, where it was done in a justifiable manner to save lives? And that was his motive for doing it, if that's the case. But.
Yeah, I compared it, Lee, when we talked about it to the Menendez brothers' imperfect self-defense argument that they endured essay at the hands of their parents, and that's why they committed the crime. But I think that the difficulty that Karen A would have if that's the approach that she decides to take is that type of argument, I think a judge would view as basically an argument for jury nullification, which you can't do. I think you can try to cloak it as this is the healthcare industry on trial, and Luigi did this to protect other people. If I'm the prosecution, I'm pushing back on that pretty hard. No lives were saved as a result of what you did. Brian Thompson is not actually the one. He's just this figurehead, and you can't take down the industry by taking down one person. There's going to be a number of arguments to counter that, but I think a judge will be very, very hesitant to allow that type of presentation or that type of defense, because it is essentially asking the jury to set aside what happened because they are sympathetic towards the defendant's cause, and that's not going to be allowed. So she's going to have to be really careful if that's the route she takes.
I'm glad you brought it up, because I know you probably need to get going here soon, but I'm glad you brought that up, because one of the things I thought was interesting was, on its own, if the defense had tried to bring up hey, he did this because the healthcare system is so bad, I would imagine they would say the healthcare system's not on trial, Luigi Mangione is. But the prosecution may have opened the whole argument, because they're saying Luigi did it because he was trying to protect people from the health insurance. So they're opening that line of inquiry in the first place, aren't they?
Well, they're not saying that he did it because he's trying to protect. They're saying that he did it to intimidate a civilian population and to impact government action. Like that is the crux of his argument in favor of this terrorism count in the New York case. And so, yes, I agree with you in spirit, but technically, and the law is very technical, I actually think what he's arguing is that it was to do those two things, which I think can be distinguished from the way that you stated it.
Yeah, fair.
Yeah.
So, Allie, I know, and thank you again for making some time for us. Just to close this out, I just asked the Hive if there's any questions for you, and we can let you answer a couple of them. Sure. I had one written down as far as the roommates, Dylan and Bethany, in the Idaho 4 case. A lot of people just said to ask you about them and their stories. Is that something, as a defense attorney, when you have such a conflicting statement that comes out in the PCA compared to now down the road, 2 years into the case, it's like you could wipe your ass with it. That's how wrong it was. Do you make that a pain point for the prosecution and point all that out? Or how does that work in defending your client then?
If I have a witness that has testified inconsistently in the past from what their testimony would be now, or that they changed their story, is that what you're asking me?
Yes, exactly. Yep.
Oh yeah, I cross-examine the shit out of them about that.
Now, they're able to, they're going to testify, but it's, I believe you don't get to see their faces and stuff like that. I believe, right? Devil's advocates, isn't that a thing? Like there
was talk about one of them testifying from remotely or something like that.
Yeah.
Not in person, but
what? That's crazy. No, you have a constitutional right to confront your accusers.
Right.
And
not only that, but I can't even believe, I mean, I don't want to side tangent too long, but I can't even believe they would have the nuts to put Dylan on the stand. Her credibility is shot when she changed her story 4 different times under pressure from the police to change the story as they're literally coaching her. What about the guy having bushy eyebrows? Oh yeah, I think he might have had bushy. I mean, it's horrible. I can't believe they would have the balls to put her on the stand.
So if it's that messy and they can make their case without it, they're not gonna subject themselves to that type of abuse on cross. They're just not. So if it's not a really necessary witness, they can do without it. They're going to cut their losses and say, we don't want for any of our witnesses to endure that type of a brutal cross-examination or impeachment on the stand.
Yeah, because it's crazy, Allie, because her story's changed a ton. And if she gets to maybe one of them gets to maybe testify remotely or without being seen. And then you have Bethany, who is fighting the subpoenas to come back. In my mind, I'm like, okay, well, if it's a safety thing, it's like you should technically have nothing to worry about. They caught the lone serial killer-esque incel, right? So, I mean, I don't want to go into it because it's a whole different rabbit hole, but like I personally believe there is a possibility for like WITSEC or some sort of CI involvement, hence the redacting for an ongoing parallel federal investigation. However, I'm going to look through the Hive for another question here. And let's see, what do we got?
And if I get a chance after Allie's off, I'll address Scott, who's attacking the crap out of me. I'll clarify that later when Allie's gone. If you want.
Okay. All right. One of them is, do you have a where did it just go? Do you have a constitutional right to not face your accuser?
To not face your
I'm not sure what I
you mean like because it is to not face your accuser because it's traumatic? Or
yeah, I think that's what that person is getting at. Like, do you have a constitutional right to say, I'm not going to take the stand, even though I don't know how maybe they need to clarify that more. Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. So if somebody is accusing you of something, you can choose not to cross-examine them. You can't they have a right to testify. If they're the complaining witness in a case against you, the prosecution is going to call them to testify. You don't have to ask them any questions. I don't recommend that. You definitely want to cross-examine the accusing witness. You also, you have a right not to show up to your own trial. Also don't recommend that. So if it's that traumatic, you don't have to go, but the jury typically doesn't like that. I hope that helped in that.
Hey, Allie, I have one question from one of my users, and it's jumping back to Luigi for a second, but
Sure.
I just thought she wanted to know what happens in the New York case if Pennsylvania is not ruling on that arrest issue, which we talk about a lot. But I mean, again, we've got Pennsylvania hasn't ruled on whether or not that was a legal arrest of Luigi in Pennsylvania, but yet New York's using all the information from that. Can you summarize again what you're thinking is how that's going to play out?
Yeah, so I think the court in Pennsylvania will eventually make a ruling, and I'm sure that Karen A will also raise the same issue in New York. Hopefully there's a ruling in Pennsylvania by then. And even though they are equal courts, meaning circuit level courts, the judge in New York will give constitutional full faith and credit to the ruling by the Pennsylvania judge when it comes to that evidence, meaning you will not see, or you should not see, two inconsistent rulings on that evidence. Hopefully Pennsylvania goes first. I think that's cleaner because they've made the motion. They've brought the issue to the court's attention. That court will rule. And then I would fully anticipate that the New York Supreme Court or circuit court judge would defer to the decision of the Pennsylvania judge in whatever they decided about that evidence. And then that would stand in the New York case as well.
Interesting. Okay, here will be the last question, Allie, and thank you again. So this is probably the most asked question that I just saw. What do you think about the King Road house being torn down before the trial, as far as maybe the jury was going to get bussed out to see it? Maybe there was evidence in there. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I'm a little surprised by that. I know that they would probably say that they went in and did a full sweep of the house and collected all relevant evidence and it's all been preserved and blah, blah, blah. But there is no substitute for a jury being not able just to, from diagrams or PowerPoints or AI generated videos, to put themselves at a crime scene. There is no substitute to putting their butts in seats in a car and driving them out to a crime scene so they can walk it themselves, so they can sit there and see things for themselves. And honestly, as a lawyer, there's no substitute for me doing that. I tried a murder case last summer where it was a club shooting, and the issue was that a person was standing outside smoking a cigarette. A gunfight broke out in the corner, and a person was hit by a bullet. They were not the intended target. And all the while, law enforcement was telling me that the surveillance footage was shooting east to north, basically like at an angle. And as it turns out, it was actually pointing this way. I would have never known to call them on it if I hadn't gone to that club myself and been like, well, hot damn, they got the cameras.
It was mirrored. It was mirrored.
And guess what you can't do? You can't get shot in the back of the head from somebody standing in front of you, because bullets don't boomerang. And bullets don't boomerang ended up being my closing argument. And my client got acquitted because they were wrong. But I would have never figured that out if I hadn't walked the crime scene. And so there's no substitute for that. I wish they hadn't done that.
I'm so glad you just shared that. That is such a powerful story about why it's important to be at the crime scene. How loud is the house? Is it creaky?
Yes.
Can you hear stuff through the walls? How does a roommate? I know obviously we now know she wasn't asleep, but she was originally claiming she was asleep and she woke up. How do you not hear anything? So to that point, that's an epic last sentence of bullets don't boomerang, of course, unless you're JFK, but that's a story for a different time.
Hey, we're finally admitting that wasn't
your hat back on.
I need to put my hat back on. Yes, you're right. God, Allie, I could talk your ear off all night, but I know you are a busy woman, like I said. So thank you for taking an hour here to spend some time with the Hive Mind. I'm sure that they enjoyed it. I know I very much so did. And if you have any plugs for yourself, if you have like a website, if you have anything for your own social media, I don't know if you do, but feel free.
Follow me on TikTok. It's pretty easy. It's just at Allie Benevento. I'm not up on YouTube yet, but at Allie Benevento, and same thing on Instagram at Allie Benevento _SLF for Strom Law Firm, which is my firm. So I'd love for you to follow along with my content. That'd be great.
Absolutely, we will. And I would love to have you back on after a couple, maybe more of these hearings get going in the Idaho case. And thank you so much, Devil's Advocates, for connecting Allie and I. And Devil's Advocates, if you have anything you want to say to Allie before she pops off, feel free.
No, just thank you, Allie, for coming on. It was a pleasure talking to you as always. So I'm excited that you got to get in front of a bigger audience and share your message, because I see a lot of people really appreciated it. So thank you again.
Well, I'm so glad. Thank you so much. I appreciate you gentlemen both. Thanks.
Absolutely, Allie. Have a great night.
You too. Take care.
Yep. Bye-bye. Man, how cool was that, Hive? She is a badass. You could just tell. So, Devil's Advocates, thank you again for hooking that up, man.
Hey, Birdie, could you pin? Allie was just saying when she left, she's like, "Hey, I wanted people to see how to follow me. Can we pin that comment?"
Yeah. What is it? Quick.
It's I posted it just a few up. It says, for those who are interested in Allie Benevento, follow at Allie Benevento at TikTok.
Here we go. There you go, folks, and happy to do that.
I got to make sure I don't have any spelling typos. It looks good. That's what you need to follow on Insta and TikTok if you want to follow Allie Benevento. By the way, I am twisting her arm to get on TikTok pretty soon. However, she's got a coworker who promised to get her set up on YouTube and port over all her videos from TikTok, and that person's kind of dragging their feet a little bit. So she's been waiting for him to do it, but she is going to get on YouTube as well.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you to that Southern blonde lawyer. That Google Doc is incredible. And I agree that Allie was, as you said, amazeballs. Yeah, that was an awesome guest. I just can't believe that story that she told about the drunk homeless guy and the EMT with the pulse finger meter.
Right.
Led to him being incarcerated and then exonerated. And
because a jury said the same thing that they're saying on Kohberger's. Well, he has to have done it. How do you explain his DNA being under the fingernail of the victim? Well, that's how you explain that one.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Where can everybody find you at? Do you want to type it into the box and I'll put it on the screen?
You mean my channels, you mean?
Yeah, your channels, yep.
Oh, yeah, sure.
No, where do you live? Where do you live? Tell us your address.
Yeah, come on over. I've got some drinks ready to go.
Yeah.
So I'll type in at Devil's Advocates.
Maybe if you wrote me a check, I could find out your address from the check. Just don't.
You wouldn't even have to work that hard. So anyway, yeah, there's my channel on YouTube. If you're not following and if you're interested in following Devil's Advocates 2024, I'm on TikTok, but like Birdie, I'm kind of moving away from TikTok. I'm getting tired of getting restricted on TikTok. So tonight's the first time, actually, Birdie, that in months that I did not go simultaneously broadcast to TikTok. I said, screw it. I'm getting banned every time or restricted every time I go. So I just decided to focus only on YouTube, so I don't have to worry about the technical glitches over there. And I'm trying to work out fixing that. But so I'm not done with TikTok. I'm going to start making some new content for TikTok and try to get my algorithm restarted over there. But for the time being, this is it. You're only going to see me on YouTube primarily for long form content. So if you want my long form content, please check that out on my website, devilsadvocates.info.
Yeah, love it, brother. And I will see you next Monday night.
All right. Thank you so much for having me on again.
Yep, no problem, my man. See ya.
Birds flying high, you know how I feel. Sun in the sky, you know how I feel. Breeze drifting on by, you know how I feel. It's a new dawn, it's a new day, it's a new life.